So both of you that watch this channel know that I missed a video last week, and I don't want you to think that I was idle. I've been working on a Myers-Briggs for magic types kind of thing, but the real reason I missed it was because I've been working on my urban fantasy, developing the world. And in fact, last night I actually finished the beat treatment, which goes back to all sorts of other stuff and how I outline. But anyways, I'm looking at my urban fantasy, the magic systems called the Inner Circle working title, which I think I'm going to stick with. And so this week I want to break down how I built a magic system for magic systems and how I'm utilizing this for the Inner Circle and the series going forward. So I hope you'll stick around and see how one of Neil Gaiman's lesser known books was an inspiration for it all. So in my previous video about Inner Circle, I mentioned that a lot of the Vertigo comics from the 90s were inspiration, and I mentioned Sandman, but what I should have mentioned was actually the books of magic. And if you don't know, it is a Neil Gaiman story that came out about a boy, a bespectacled boy, and his pet owl who is brought into the world of magic. Came out a year before, I think, Harry Potter. Side note, Gaiman says has no influence on Harry Potter. I think it's Tim Hunter is the name. And anyways, it was, as much as I loved Sandman, and when I read it, Books of Magic was much more accessible. You had a kid brought into this new world, anyways, I got to meet Neil Gaiman, and he actually autographed it. And I asked him, like, man, this book, Books of Magic, had a profound effect on me. Like, what? He was like, oh, I was a writer for hire gig. Like, the editor needed somebody to explain all of DC's magic, a primer basically for people just getting into DC comics to know that they're, the Vertigo magic stuff. And so, I thought, what about Christmas Tale? I'll do Christmas Tale, but with 4 ghosts. And so it was 4 issues. And I'm like, wow, like that was kind of cool that he just took a gig and made this really cool story. And the reason it was so profound to me was because it introduced magic and so many different types of magic, multiple magic systems, multiple characters over a course of decades, and brought them all together in one singular story and introduced you to all of them. And so that is why it is a big influence on me, as well as the Invisibles, where anything goes kind of thing, and magic is always just under the surface. So that is a lot of inspiration for my urban fantasy series. And so when we break it down and look at the fantasy conceits, there are really just 2, magic and culture. Magic exists, magic systems exist, all types of magic systems exist, and because of it, there is a separate magician culture that goes on. Magic is the prime mover in this. That means you cannot remove magic from the conceits without the story falling apart. I have a video about prime movers, I think. It's an old one, so I don't know if it's up. But anyways, yeah, the prime mover is if you take this thing out of it, the story falls apart. And in this one, it's magic. Everything centers around magic and the big pyramid of fantasy conceits. So even though there are kind of other things, let's say sort of like biological creatures that break the laws of nature, and sort of metaphysical beings, they kind of fall under the auspices of magic, and we'll explain that later, and because of the magic that they exist. I mentioned, or may mention another one, that another inspiration for me was Mage the Ascension, the RPG from the 90s, again, see where I grew up. And there was a concept of paradox in which, you keep using magic and then it will cause damage to you the more magic you use. But there was also inspiration from another RPG, Nightbane, which was once Nightspawn, and the Books of Magic, and that the whole idea is that there is a cost of doing magic. It's not as in a cost system as I've discussed in magic systems, but there is a cost to doing magic. One of the things I really loved about Books of Magic is, he's talking to this seer from Atlantis who can't actually see him. She just knows he's there, and she's talking about the cost of it, and like, but I would do it again. And that's kind of what I'm going for with this. Part of the idea is that magic exerts a cost upon you, and it's kind of like the paradox from Mage the Ascension, and that you're reshaping reality. Reality doesn't like it. Reality hurts you because of you doing it. But it's not like Mage the Ascension, which was kind of based on a collective consciousness, as in we all agree on reality, and the mage is the one who is like bucking the system, so everyone's kind of collective conscious, unconscious is the one that's hitting them back. It's more of, but I am kind of using that, but my system is more of like, the more magic you use, as in, back to the fit system from exercising frequency, intensity, and time, the more you do these things, the more effect it has on the area, and on the person who's doing the magic. And so I broke them into 3 levels, and the idea that one thing's like they're side effects, and the first level is that things that are possible. The next level is that things that are impossible, and the third level are things that are catastrophic. And you don't really want to go above level 1 if you can help it. When it comes to physical things that happen to the magician who's doing the magic, the first level is kind of minor changes, like your hair or eye color will shift, skin color, things that can happen. Might grow a tail, there's just little weird stuff. Extra joints. I've been using AI generated images to get kind of like body horror things, like an extra tooth starts going like, okay, this is weird stuff. And that was the other thing. One of the other inspirations is a brand new cherry flavor, if you saw that on Netflix. And I was watching it and was like, okay, this has got a lot of horror, but it's a little bit of fantasy in it. And I kind of want to reverse it so that it's, this book is like 80% fantasy and a little bit of horror, specifically body and cosmic horror. So yeah, that's the level 1 kind of stuff where things start going wrong. You've been using magic and you're like, I got an extra joint there. That's getting kind of weird. I should probably cut back. But if you continue on, you might move to level 2 magic side effects, and that's where things start getting impossible. Like you start growing organs that you shouldn't, parasites, that kind of thing. You start glowing. The movie Annihilation, Natalie Portman was in it, good kind of thing. I remember there's a scene where they open up the guy's stomach and there's actually snakes instead of intestines in there, like that kind of thing. Things that you can't explain by nature. Nature has nothing to do with this. It's just weird and horrific. And catastrophic, third level, is where you start to lose your humanity. You start coming apart as a creature and become an elemental being. You lose your humanity. So as I said, like the prime mover was magic, and so by doing too much magic, it can kind of start creates the creatures that can be metaphysical beings of angels, vampires, fairies, that kind of thing, of when you've just done magic too much. So these things kind of exist in this world, but they're because of the magic, as in side effects. There's also the area effects, as in that the area that you're doing the magic. So the more, if I keep doing magic in my room, things are going to start getting weird in the room because I've broken reality so often and it's kind of frayed the edges of it. And so like the first level is things that can happen. It's all coincidence. Running into the person or the thing dropping into the book falling and opening to the right page, flipping a coin 50 times, getting heads 50 times, stuff that can physically happen. Electronics breaks down, which is kind of like the kind of like Dresden, where they don't like technology. The reasoning for it in this one is because if you need something, the coincidence will be that it breaks down when it does, and technology gives you lots more chances for things to break down. A lever is just going to snap kind of thing, opposed to all the electronics that can go wrong, and we'll get back to that in just a second. But they all still abide by the laws of physics, things that can happen. I had a friend who dropped a scissors one time, metal scissors, and swore that it was magnetized when she picked it back up. Stuff like that would happen. The next level are impossible things, as in you're breaking the laws of physics. Gravity is a little wonky, magnetics are wonky, electricity doesn't work the same, space kind of bends. So the cool stuff, the weird things that you kind of want to see in a magic, water starts dripping up instead of down, fun stuff. And then, catastrophic is what is called a snapback. That's where you've broken reality. It kind of gets sucked out into the void, and then all the reality around it just floods in like a tsunami, and it causes this like bang. And if you're there, it's going to hurt. It's like an atomic level ouch. And not ouch because, bad. So disastrous results. So everyone wants to avoid all of this. So physical plus area, those two break down, the more you use the magic. So then the more you use the magic, you're kind of higher primed. It's like radiation. And then you're in an area that's like more frayed because of magic, that increases the chance of a snapback, which is one of the reasons that we'll get into in the next video on culture, that the magicians try to hold people back once they start noticing that, oh no, you've got an extra tooth, or your hair is a little weird color, like it's time to pull it back. It's partially because your health and safety, and also for the safety of the area. Kind of like Mage of the Ascension, normal people do fray reality just from being in large concentrations, but it's a little different. It's not the shared consciousness kind of thing, but large groups of people fray reality. So as such, cities are always kind of at level 1. There's always coincidences happening that shouldn't, and a mage in there is going to have extra coincidences. So that's one of the reasons that we have the whole circle, which we'll get into in the next video. And also because areas can get cursed by a large number of people with higher emotions. Airplanes are out. Magicians do not travel on airplanes because the airplane is already primed from so many negative emotions from people having bad experiences in it. And, so putting a magician in an airplane is, recipe for disaster. All that electronics, so many coincidences can go wrong. So mages don't fly. They always travel by land. And part of this is also because then I can focus just on America itself. Okay, so most magic systems around, in most books, a magic is usually exclusive, like only certain people are wizards in Harry Potter, and its bloodlines and that kind of thing. Only certain, creatures are Jedis, only a few number can use the Force. Airbenders, same thing, everyone, it's rare that you have a magician, they're special. And so I had to break out the populations, and I was looking at it, and I was like, okay, I'm going to do 1% of 1% of the population, so American population is this, there should be this many magicians in there. I also decided what types of magics using my AALC magic systems. There's going to be a lot of abilities, static and advancing, a lot of levels advancing, some soft powers, especially for the main character as he's learning his abilities over the course of the story, and and some cost systems, potions and regular cost systems. But again, my premise is any magic system goes, so I had to use a very robust system to account for all of this. And with that in mind, I started breaking down the populations of the 1% of 1%. So I did that of like, okay, there's this many people in America, this is what it's going to look like. I looked at the city to urban divide, put it out like that. I hopefully have, and I use spreadsheets because I have a history of spreadsheets and I'm pretty good with them. But then again, I had to look at where I wanted my characters to be for their level systems and that kind of thing. So I broke it into 10 kind of levels, and this is just shorthand for myself. I'm going with what the story calls for, but I'm looking at how powerful my mage is going to be, because I want this to be a hard system. I don't want any soft squishiness to it, all of it. When it makes sense, I want it to unconsciously make sense to the readers because it makes sense to me as an author. So I decided on 10 levels of what people are, mages are strength-wise, broke it out, so there's very, very few. And I have a nice little other, generator in my Excel that tells me of like, okay, this is a city of 20,000 people. This is what the general levels are going to be naturally occurring without the wizards or magicians coming and going. I also had to, and once I broke out those levels, I kind of knew how strong people were and who's guiding things, and knowing that most of my characters are going to be operating on like the 1 to 4 levels of the 10, because I played with the Fibonacci sequence, and so level 10 is unheard of. They are godlike powers, and they may exist, but most of my characters will never meet one. I also had to look at casting times and how quickly they can do magic. Again, going back to the point system, where it's just understood that the more powerful things you do take longer. I broke out a rough sketch to a rule of thumb for myself to use. And just one thing to remember all about this is that this is kind of on the background. I understand the magic systems and how they work. I'm not figuring it out every time. This isn't lit RPG. I know basically each character is about this level. They should be able to do these things. And if they're going to do more or less, I need to explain it with a cost system. And with all that in mind, then I could start working on the story itself. I had a pretty good idea, and I was also working on culture. So I've actually filmed this video much, much later than my video on culture, because during the culture is what inspired me about working on the wild magic. And so I had to step it back and do that, which just kind of goes to show that there's no linear system to any of this. You're working on character, you're working on plot, you're working on world building all at the same time, and you go where the inspiration takes you, and use all this as a framework to keep it all in mind. So I have, at this point, finished the outline. We'll start the rough draft next week, and this is kind of all the underlying stuff that's undergirding it, which is a word I think I probably shouldn't say. It just sounds weird and dirty. And so yeah, those are my magic systems of Inner Circle. I hope you can use them to build some better worlds, and also buy the book when it comes out. That's the important one.